This is Bonjour Chai, the Vive Cause edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltz Bovy. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk about the elections in Europe and what they portend for the future. We talk about Alice Munro and the scandal surrounding her, and we talk about Phoebe's take on bi women. All this and more coming right up.
How are you doing, Avi?
I'm good. I was on a trip for like a long time. I spoke to you last time from Montreal, and then I saw you in Toronto.
Yes, that's right. Avi and I were in a room together. You may have thought we were the same person and that wouldn't be possible. I know. So, Avi, there's a lot of political stuff happening, and we are the big wonks. We are known for our wonkitude.
There's Jewish wonkiness going on because there are UK and French elections, and everybody in the Jewish community is like, well, is this good for the Jews or is this not good for the Jews?
That is the only question, right? So is Keir Starmer what? So I read skimmed something in the Jewish Chronicle about how you shouldn't Shabbat shame Keir Starmer for taking Friday nights off, which he does because his wife is Jewish, although also in some interview he said she isn't. I am so confused. Why are they doing Shabbat if they're
I
not
haven't
Jewish?
figured out the Jewishness of the
I am just so
Starmers.
lost here. Okay.
I'm sure somebody will write in and inform us exactly of the lineage going back to the 14th century of the Starmers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So whoever is researching Joe Roberts, can they just channel a little bit of that energy? Because I do not have this. And the reason, there's a very specific, concrete reason I do not have this energy. I spent a while in grad school trying to figure out the lineage of a historic figure, and it was exhausting and led to just a lot of documents and didn't end up really needing this in my dissertation at all. I'm done researching who's what and where they come from and all that. If somebody else wants to figure out...
You are not of the amateur genealogists. That's the word I was looking for.
No, and I totally should be because I have booklets for all the relatives about our heritage. So I should...
I've always wondered, does Bovy come from Beauvais?
A lot have wondered this. No,
but there's a deep Jewish connection because Beauvais was the author of the conte, right? The various fables of Beauvais, right? Do you know about this?
No, I don't.
This is hundreds of years ago. There was a famous author, very similar to Aesop's fables and other, Grimm's fairy tales, that wrote a book in French with various fables called Beauvais, Bovet, and that got translated to Yiddish, and it became the Bovebuch. And the Bovebuch was what you told your kids stories at night as they were going to sleep, and that got corrupted to what we now refer to as Bubba-Mises, right? Which are grandmother's stories, but it's not really stories from your grandmother; it's stories from the Bovebuch.
Oh, right? Wow.
And
okay.
so the idea of
Bubba-Mises
has nothing to do with your grandmother's fairy tales and lies. It's just stories from the Bovebuch.
Amazing. Well, I had no idea. I'm going to have to look this up later. Politics.
But anyways, back to politics.
So France, then. Something happened in France, too, right? So it was all over the news that France was suddenly far right, that a lot of the votes went to is it still the Front National, or are they calling themselves something else now? Or, ever since I can remember, there's a news cycle about how can you believe how many French people voted for the far right, but then they don't actually take power. And once again, a lot of people voted for the far right, but not enough. And they did not actually take power. And then the far left had a good showing.
To me, it's not about massive swings in one direction or another, but it's about the increased polarization that we're seeing, both across the pond and over here. And I'm curious as to how that is going to play itself out in our elections. But I think we should just, maybe let's put a pin in that. And
Avi, we can't put the pin in it yet because the question is, did you not see that headline, Chief Rabbi in France says France is over for Jews? Did you not?
I did not, actually.
Oh, okay.
Please tell me.
Okay. Yeah, I think that from best as I can tell, there seems to be a lot of concern that it's bad for the Jews in France if things are too right-wing, but also if things are too left-wing. I know much more about French history than French this week, but basically extreme politics on the left or the right, you get different issues. On the right, you get the legacy of Vichy, of, French Nazis, as it were. Then there's the far left, you get the sort of anti-Israel stuff, right? And French Jews are often pretty pro-Israel. They tend to be more of North African background at this point. A lot of them have family in Israel. They're more likely to be moving to or back from Israel than like your average sort of multi-generation American or Canadian Jew. I just have like a more general thought about it than anything sort of like wonky or pundity, which is just that these, like this whole is such and such place over for Jews is not a good line of thought. And I don't think that Israel's over for Jews. I don't think France is over for Jews. I don't think Canada is.
I'm with you in the, I think there's so much fear mongering that happens when the need to like, well, this is over. We all have to leave. This is truly terrifying and scary. And I hear this language over and over again. Maybe that's the problem, is that I've been inured to this language by hearing it in Canada so often. Oh, this is terrible. There was a shot fired into a school, which is admittedly not a great thing to happen, but that leads to, we must all liquidate this country and go to Israel. And
yeah.
When Jews, when neo-Nazis march in Charlottesville and say Jews will not replace us, it is over for Jews in America. We all have to leave and go to Israel. We all, like, this is
right. I mean, I think all of these things are, especially like the shots fired in school. I think that is, I would say, more than not great. The problem that I keep coming up against is there's no place where these sorts of things don't happen. Because you say you go to Israel, well, October 7th comes to mind as a reason why Israel isn't perfectly safe for Jews either.
Yeah, I mean, if you're worried about somebody attacking you because you're a Jew, the goal is to disarm that way of thinking and that approach, and not to just say, I'm washing my hands of this land and I have to leave.
Right. So for those who want to hear more about politics, there is a CJN daily podcast. It's time for French Jews and Jews in the diaspora to come live in Israel, says MK Sharon Haskell. So that's something you could listen to.
Yeah.
I think it's time for anybody to live wherever they want to live. That's what I think it's time for.
I believe that as well. Okay, well, let's move on to other stuff. There was a scandal of sorts that happened many, many years ago, but we only are finding out about it now. So the scandal has become a now sort of thing. Do you want to tell us, Phoebe, what is happening in the life of the now deceased Alice Munro?
Yes. So the Toronto Star broke the news. Andrea Robin Skinner, when she was 9 years old, was sexually assaulted by her stepfather, Gerald Fremlin. Okay. This was like proven in court, but her mother, Alice Munro, really like a sort of up there with Margaret Atwood, one of these really like the canonical Canadian literary figures, stayed with this man. And he, more to the point, had accused the then 9-year-old girl of having been a homewrecker and seduced him, sort of the Lolita line, right? Mm-hmm. And this has a lot of people who are big Alice Munro fans questioning everything. Like, basically, how can a writer you like turn out to be somebody who did something not very nice, or more than not very nice, in their personal life? Avi, do you struggle with this regarding Alice Munro specifically, or artists generally?
I don't struggle with it with Alice Munro specifically, because I must admit I have read very little Alice Munro in my life, although I should correct that. I don't know what to make. Like, I feel like I'm kind of blasé on the, well, we must not listen to this person's music because they are, an anti-Semite, or they beat their wife, or they don't like Israel so much. And I can think of many artists that fit into all of those categories, or writers, or what other form of creators of some kind. I believe Alice Munro would be very distraught to know that she's reduced to a content creator in the current economy. I mean, the art and artist thing, though, like, to me, this just seems like they're very different questions when the person's dead or alive. Also, like, it's awful. I mean, I think it's awful, even though she wasn't the abuser herself. I still think this is awful. I don't think it really matters in terms of the art, though, because it is like a creation independent of the person. I don't think art is like an extension of the artist. So I think
I
there
don't
are
think it
cases,
changes at all.
I think there are cases when that isn't true. You know, I find it hard to listen, for example, to R. Kelly, right? Who is an artist who's sings,
living, though.
He's living. No, even if the person is deceased. I'm saying that, like, in this case, the things that he is accused of doing, or he has committed because he has been convicted in court about various things, right, are the very things that he sings about in his music. And as a result, it feels like it's harder to separate the two, right? It's harder to listen, for example, to the Meister singers from Wagner because it has, you know, overt anti-Semitic themes in it, as opposed to other pieces where it's a little more latent, you know. And I think that that's a distinction that I can make for myself, and that totally separating the art from the artist is generally, yes, I'm with you, but there are cases where I feel like it doesn't make sense anymore.
I feel like I just want to know as little as possible about what people who create things I like. I mean, I'm not even talking about, like, I'm not talking now about something like abuse. I just mean in terms of, like, their political views. Like, I remember once I was in one of these IMDb, Wikipedia type sinkholes, learning everything I could about people from some Britcom that I like. And I'm learning that one of them is like some sort of like activist of some sort that I didn't agree with. And I remember thinking, like, but why do I need to know this? Like, who cares? Like, I don't care. It doesn't make me think less of the show. And then I just sort of forgot about it.
Do you think this is why people like Pynchon and Salinger and other reclusive artists or authors are reclusive? Because they know they have horrible views, or they do really, really weird and bad things. And
I think it's
like,
because they can. I think that's how you get writing done, to be honest. I don't know. That's probably just how you get the work done. Possibly.
I don't know her intent. It's, first of all, again, even if I'm going to get into it, like, she didn't do this. She kept it from the world and did not intervene. That's not a great thing. She might have had her reasons for it. She might have had, you know, some, I don't know. And as a result of not knowing, I like to not speculate too much, because that's not good. It just doesn't, you know, it doesn't add anything to the conversation other than just, I'm going to create more content so that you can read my article that I need to, like, create more content for.
Right. I mean, that is something I had wondered about as well. The fact that generally when an artist is revealed to have been a terrible person, it's the things they did rather than things that they were associated with.
Yeah. Like, for all we know, she could have been abused by this individual for decades of her life, and he had her under his thumb, and she couldn't say anything because he would continue to beat her, and she couldn't get out of this marriage for whatever other number of reasons.
So, Avi, it's good you say this, because this segues us into the next thing, which is gossip, speculation, Judaism, which is why we bring it all up in a way. So we were talking offline, even in person, you know, we were Avi and I were discussing this in person. Don't tell them how the sausage is made. So yeah, as the pigs were being butchered, just kidding. We were talking about just sort of how the Jewish prohibition on gossip sort of brushes up against such things as whisper networks and this idea that you have to be able to kind of gossip to share information. I have my own complicated views on this, but let's first talk about, forget me, I'm just one person, Judaism, a bigger deal. Where does Judaism stand on gossip in the name of, you know, sexual misconduct type topics? You know,
gossip's complicated. It's in the modern era, you hear a lot of this discussion in the Jewish world about lashon hara, evil speech, right? Things which you're not supposed to talk about. And what's interesting about it is that this is stuff that was never really codified. This is never legalized as, like, you know, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, until about 100 years ago when a rabbi went and wrote this book on laws of, like, evil speech. And there's something kind of, like, interesting and hard to, like, parse about what do you do when you take, like, something which is a good value, which is don't talebear, don't get engaged in gossip and things like that, and try to codify it by making it, like, legalistic and saying this is allowed, this is not allowed, this is allowed, this is not allowed. And it's, you know, sort of akin to, like, taking a self-help principle, which might be a good idea, and then turning it into like law. Like imagine if, the idea behind minimalism and Marie Kondo and the KonMari method and whatever, those were good values. You don't need to own too many things. You don't need to, clutter your home and your life and try to like live a little simpler and more frugally, et cetera, et cetera. And then somebody went and said, no, this is really important. And we need to codify. We need to go and turn these into rules. And that if you don't follow these rules, you are not a good Jew or a good Christian or a good whatever, So I don't like the idea of gossip, but I also recognize that sometimes there is value to it. I also realize that when it's valuable, then it's not gossip, then it's important.
So this is amazing because this completely makes me think of the Dan Savage thing that he was talking about recently on the Savage Lovecast about snooping, that it's basically snooping is bad
like
unless you find something.
You check your partner's phone.
Yeah, unless you find out. But then if it turns out that you look on your partner's phone and you find out that they have a second family that they hadn't been telling you about, then the crime is not the snooping, it is the having of the second family.
That reminds me of I read recently something about witch hunts and the whole, like if she floats, she's a witch. And if she sinks, then she wasn't a witch, but that means that she's dead. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you snoop or you tell gossip and it's bad, then it's bad, but it's too late, then you've done a crime. But if something good comes out of it, then all of a sudden the bad thing gets taken off of you. You haven't done anything bad, right? Even though your intention was whatever it is, then and all of a sudden you're a good person. Like I said, Judaism has a lot to say about it, but it also, I feel, isn't always useful to think about and discuss in a religious context because, there's always this out where they go and say, well, it's allowed to have gossip. You're allowed to do lashon hara if it's litoelet, if it's for the benefit. Right.
Yeah.
Of what people need to know about this. So, I'm going to go and talk about how evil this individual's, public acts are, because I want the world to know how evil this person is. But that person's only evil in your perspective, and that person doesn't think that what they're doing is bad, and you're just placing a value judgment on something as being objectively wrong, and then that person can say the same thing about you. And you wouldn't want them to talk about how evil you are because you've legalized and canonized evil speech. It's too complicated of a system, too complicated of a form of speech, I think, to actually really police and to get into.
Yeah. My own issue with sort of whisper networks and all of this is that I don't know that they end up helping always the way they think. Sometimes it ends up being just kind of signaling that things and other people don't. So this is what I saw happen a bunch with me too, where I would see sort of, we all know that this man, we all knew that he was bad. And it's like, well, maybe you all did, but were you actually telling people outside of your little clique about that? And it doesn't actually necessarily spread the necessary information. Conversely, it sometimes is just defaming people who didn't actually, either they didn't do anything or they did something that wasn't abusive but was just annoying. And then because everything's so hazy, it all gets conflated. Like annoying behavior and abusive behavior get conflated. So like whenever I see something like there's a new Me Too story, I feel like what that moment in time taught me is you have to look what actually is accused. Does it, where how do you even categorize it, assuming it is true? What would that even mean, So I think here, like, this is legitimately something awful, right? I think that's not in all stories the case.
The last thing that I'm curious about what's going on with you is you had an article that you wrote. You had a column, I should say, in the Globe and Mail, which got a little piled on, both for good and for not so good. Tell us about this column.
Yes. So this was a while ago. It appeared online in May. I wrote a column about new statistics from Gallup, so U.S. sort of population-wide statistics about sexual orientation, self-identification, that found that really skyrocketing numbers of Gen Z, so very young women, the youngest adult women, are identifying as bisexual. So there's a lot of sort of buzz about many more people identifying as LGBT or LGBTQ, and a lot of discussion about, is it that a lot of people now have, are non-binary and using they, them pronouns? Well, maybe on your block in Toronto there are. in general, no, that isn't really what the change is. The big change is that there are a lot more young women identifying as bisexual. And what I was writing about it was not pro or con. It was not anything like that. I was trying to figure out what that means. And I was also responding to a bunch of people who had been saying, oh, they're faking. They're doing this to seem interesting. They're doing this to seem like victims in a society where you get cachet if you're seen as a victim. And if you're a white woman, you're seen as boring unless you have some sort of oppressed quality, and that they're faking. I said I don't think that that's it. I don't think this is about people faking. And this is just like understood that most people who are bisexual do end up in an opposite sex partnership, not because they aren't really bisexual, but because there's just more straight people out there than gay people, right? It's just easier to find an opposite sex partner, especially for women. There are more straight men than there are lesbian or bisexual women to pair off with. Like, it's a numbers game. And there's the social pressure, homophobia, whatever, there's still the usual social pressure to have a male partner. That's also a factor. So if you're fine with either, then maybe you'd go with that one. But basically, I do think, though, that something has changed in what bisexual means. I think it has come to mean both liking men and women and not being opposed to liking men and women, which is a little bit different. So it's a little bit more expansive. It allows for more people to consider themselves a little bit bisexual, who maybe once had a passing thought, which is different from actively dating or trying to date both, right? So even if at different parts of your life. So that was all I was saying, is that I think that one possibility is that there's been a shift in what the term means, so it's now sort of more all-encompassing. Somehow lines got crossed, or people don't like me for other reasons in the sort of lefty Canadian media sphere, and I got a bunch of pushback. How dare you do a genocide of the bisexuals, Phoebe? What are you thinking? And during Pride Month, because then the print edition appeared in June. So this was clearly that I had nefariously had it in for the bisexual community, and then an article in the Toronto Star appeared by Zoe Whittle saying in it that bisexual women with male partners shouldn't be accused of being fakers. It's just the odds are that they will find an opposite sex partner, which, as we have established, is what I also said in my piece. So it was a little strange to see this in a rebuttal, the exact same thing I'd argued. Mm-hmm. But now, the reason we're bringing this up now is that a July 10th podcast is mad at me, and I haven't listened to it, but apparently they considered the article to be dog shit, and they tagged me on Twitter so I would know. So, okay, apologies for being a pooping dog. No, I don't know. It's just like I don't really have that much to say about it, because it's like
your thoughts are written out and
yeah. So some people in Canadian media don't like me.
Yeah.
So
my sense
right.
is that
I don't know.
My sense is that way back in the day when I was a youth in college, with a sweatshirt that said college
I would hope
on
so.
it, it was important to be an ally, and I feel like nowadays it's not enough to be just an ally, and these are ways in which the allyship gets performed, to use the terms of the day.
Yeah, so that is something else that I talk about, which is that I don't think ally exists as a category the way it used to. I don't think that you can call yourself an ally anymore, because that just seems a little like what does that mean, right? You shouldn't be a hater, but once you call yourself an ally, it almost seems like you're sort of flirting with cultural appropriation. Should you really be in those spaces? Should you really claim an affinity for a group you're not a part of? Isn't that a little problematic? So I think it is ultimately easier, if you are the proverbial straight woman in the gay bar, to say, no, I'm not a straight woman in the gay bar. I'm something else.
Yeah,
even if ultimately you only date men and are not actually trying to date women. There are some feminists who say there's no such thing as a male feminist.
Correct.
So
yes.
Is it like that?
Yeah.
Is it something like that?
And so how as a male do you identify? You sort of say, well, I'm an ally. I can't be a feminist because it's never really been my thing. And therefore the best that I can say is I agree with everything that you're saying and I'm with you. And so that used to be like being an ally. And nowadays that's not good, because it's like, well, if you're an ally, then why can't you just become a woman and share in our struggle, right? Like, it's not enough to do that.
Okay.
No,
now
I'm saying
really
that, like,
lost. I'm really
That's
lost.
the
I
bi
think
thing.
it's not so much.
It's moving to the bi
I don't
thing,
think
and
it's. I don't think anybody's saying why can't you become a woman. I think what people are saying though is more that there's this broader category of queerness that can encompass a lot of different things. Some of which are like being trans or gay and living a life where people are going to discriminate against you because you're, marginalized in sort of clear-cut ways. Some of it can also be that you're leading the life of a cisgender heterosexual person, but you have the occasional thought that would put you outside of that. And you are saying that that's just as valid as living a life that would involve having either same-sex partners or a gender non-conforming presentation. And yeah, I mean, I think there's this complicated thing to do with gatekeeping, like don't gatekeep, but also sort of do gatekeep in certain respects. It's complicated. I don't know how much of this to get into on this particular podcast because it's some of it a little bit, but it does relate. It also relates to what I'm writing about now for the CJN magazine about philosemitism, because that's also this question of allies and when is an ally helpful or not so helpful. And when is an ally just... Yeah, well, it's also, but just when is it an ally? I mean, what I'm writing about more is this question of people, of certain non-Jews turning the Jews into some kind of project or idea or whatever, and making arguments that don't really have anything to do with Jews, don't actually necessarily benefit Jews, but are sort of done in our name.
Yeah, I mean, but that does relate to this column in this article, and the idea that like you have to show that you're living your values, right? It's not enough to just say your values, but if you're a cisgendered woman and you say I'm with these people, then you have to perform it in some way. That's I guess that's where I'm going towards, and we don't expect that of non-Jews. Right.
Well,
but that philosemitism.
Yeah, I mean, I think each type of identity has its own boundaries. I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the sort of Joe Roberts as pretext for conversation episode of like, there are types of identity where it's take somebody's word for it. Jewish isn't generally one of those. Yeah. So the only reason this is maybe at all relevant to Bonjour any of this is that I do think that and maybe this is me conspiracy theorizing about the world, and I have the string and the pins and the board, so don't worry. But I think there is a perception that I am on the bad side. I am on the evil Zionist far-right extremist side, even though I think if somebody actually looks at what my positions were, I don't think they would land there. But the point is, yes, I do think Israel should exist. Would I run it as it's being run? No. I don't run it, though, so what am I supposed to... I'm not Israeli, also. But yeah, it's true. I don't think that Israel should be wiped off the map. So if that makes me on the bad team, according to lefty Canadian media, fine. I guess I'm not too bothered. But the reason I mention this is I think that some of why people were mad at me for saying not very exciting things about bisexuality was actually part of a bigger story of this whole omni-cause thing. And I don't really think... I don't feel like I'm part of the anti-omni-cause either. I feel like I just have my views on different topics. But, maybe they feel that way about themselves too. Probably not. But whatever. Who knows? I can't know. I'm just glad they came up with the best new name for you possible. Yes. Apparently, I am Phoebe Matzo Ball. Yeah. I have legally changed my name. I was going to go with Homo Phoebe Maltz Bovy, but... that's true. Okay, I'm going to have to legally change my name again. Homophobia. I don't even know how you do that. Okay, then. Let's move on to Nachas or Broigus right after we hear from a sponsor.
I can't date women right now because I'm too busy calling myself a piece of shit. I had a dysfunctional Jewish mother and I had a dysfunctional Native mother. I had 25 full years of utter struggle and failure. I started to realize the absurdity of my inability to let go of this monster of guilt. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Hi, I'm Ralph Benrig. I'm the host of Not That Kind of Rabbi, where we look at people's spiritual journeys and take a little time for their self-reflection, and maybe yours. You can get it all at the cjn.ca/
patreon.com/NTKR or wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, Phoebe, do you have nachas? Do you have bregas? What do you have?
I have nachas, and it's going to be not at all political. Sorry. It's not going to be any sort of contentious thing, unless you find this contentious. Actually, it might be strike breaking. So wait until the LCBO is done striking, and then go to their website. I don't want to be telling anybody.
Wait, you're taking the side of the LCBO, so you are getting political.
No, I'm saying wait until the strike is resolved, and then go to their sour cherry clafoutis recipe from early summer 2018 by Julia Aitken. I had bought sour cherries as kind of like, I don't want to say impulse purchase. I used to make pie out of this, but now I have 2 little children and I am not making any pie. And apparently you basically make an omelet with sugar and flour in a blender, pour it over them, and you have cake.
A clafoutis.
I recommend doing that. But
the only person I know who has recommended a clafoutis is Mark Bittman. He's like all on the clafoutis train always.
Avi, what have you got?
I have a classic Phoebe Nabro, Nachas Broigus.
Okay.
I went to this really interesting event with our technical producer, who actually was Zach. We had a meetup Monday night. There's this thing that apparently has been going on in Toronto for years and years called Trampoline Hall, where they invite 3 people, and it's curated by a certain person who invites 3 of their friends, I guess, to a bar where they proceed to give a lecture followed by an extensive Q&A on a topic that they know actually very little about, and they had to research for this, presentation. Mm-hmm. And it led to very mixed results, I could say, right? Like there are people who, don't necessarily belong presenting publicly about anything, let alone the topic that they chose to research poorly. There are people who you can tell are really good at presenting in public and are really good at researching and come up with here, I was given this topic with very short notice, and I just gave an excellent presentation about this.
This is what you're describing as podcasting.
Yeah, but live and not recorded. And it was, like I said, it was mixed results. There were people, there were 3 presenters, some of which were excellent, and I give all my nachas to them, and some of which were really, really bregas-inducing. It was interesting. It was great to hang out with Zach, and that's it. That's the Nabro of the week. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending July 13th, Shabbat Parashat Chukat. The show is produced by Michael Freeman and edited by Zach Hoffman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get all your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.
Y'all remember that joke from Airplane? The old lady asked for some light reading.
How about this leaflet, famous Jewish sports legends?
But in actuality, that's changing. Jews are crushing it in sports around the world, and we are here to celebrate them.
Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout.
Zach Hyman, his first career hat trick. 41 points for Diddy Avdia. It's Sue Bird's building.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Jamie.
We love Jews and we love sports, but most of all, we love kvelling over Jews in sports.
Together we host Menschwarmers, the longest running Jewish sports podcast in the world. Listen and subscribe at thecjn.ca and wherever you find your podcasts.